think that when it comes to talking about anxiety, alcohol is often the missing piece. So many of us think it's the solution to anxiety, whereas for me and many others, it's actually causing it.
Hello, I'm Dr. Jodie Richardson, and you're listening to Well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. Hello, and welcome back to another episode. Today, I'm really excited to introduce to you a guest whose occupation is one I'd never heard of until I came across Sarah's work. Sarah is a grey area drinking coach. So today's guest is Sarah Rusbatch. She's the face behind Perth's alcohol-free movement. She's a parent. She is a coach. She works one-on-one with men, but has programs for women and probably works one-on-one with women as well. I'll ask Sarah that question in a moment. She's recently celebrated 1,000 days sober. And I welcome you, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to learn more about what you do and how the difference it makes reducing alcohol in relation to anxiety, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on, because I'm so aligned with the work you do, Jodie. And I think that when it comes to talking about anxiety, alcohol is often the missing piece, that so many of us think it's the solution to anxiety, whereas for me and many others, it's actually causing it.
Oh, look, so it is. And when you and I connected, you're exactly right. And I was chatting with my husband, Peter, and I was saying, this is so interesting because, and it's funny, I'll tell our listeners that you came across my work by listening to a podcast episode I'd done with Craig Harper on the You Project. And it's so funny because I don't know, Sarah, if this is the episode you listened to, but for my listeners who haven't heard that, I did share with Craig. We were talking about if we worry about what people think of us. And I said, yes. And I was saying how the person for whom I do this shall remain nameless. Fairly frequently, I need to buy a number of bottles of wine for somebody in my life who isn't able to sort of get out and about as much as they'd like to themselves. And this particular person loves the $2.99 wine from Aldi. And when I go to Aldi, I'm frequently buying sort of 6 to 10 bottles of the $2.99 wine. And it's really embarrassing. One, because it's a lot of wine, regardless of the price. But when it's $3 wine, it makes it even worse. And one of my wonderful friends, Tina, has set me a challenge that every time I buy the wine, I am not allowed to disclose that it is for someone else. Anyway, I shared that with Craig. Craig thought it was hilarious that I even cared that what anyone thought about my wine, my frequent wine purchases. I said I do. And Sarah, I wondered if you thought perhaps secretly that wine was for me. And that's is that the episode you listened to, Sarah?
I don't think it was. I can't remember hearing that story. I think the one I heard was the one where Craig was challenging you to set up this podcast.
Yes.
And it was kind of, that was how I came across the work that you do, working in the anxiety space, and that was when you and I connected. Yeah.
I wondered, well, that's good to know, because I said to my husband, I said, oh my gosh, I think she thinks that I was buying it for myself. And that anyway, just to put it out there, we are talking about sobriety and alcohol and anxiety today. And I'm going to launch into a question in a moment, but I do drink, and I do drink. But I'm very conscious of my drinking habits and aware that I was drinking a lot more in lockdown. I was finding myself having a drink each evening because the stress and the anxiety was building. And then as things started to settle down, I reflected on that habit, that new habit that I'd formed, and it's not in line with my values. And I love that you do a lot of values work as well with your clients, and recognize that this is not behavior that's in alignment with the way that I want to live. And I've scaled it right back to just a drink or two on the weekend, unless I'm happen to be out celebrating a wedding or a birthday or something like that. So just to put that out there, I don't buy the wine for me, but nonetheless, tell me, Sarah, tell us, what's a grey area drinking coach?
Yeah. So it's a relatively new term here in Australia. In the US and more so in the UK, they're using this term grey area drinking because it's looking at, up until recently, the conversation around alcohol was you're an alcoholic or you're a social drinker. And there are actually scales of addiction, and it's not as clean cut as like at what point do you cross that line from being a social drinker to being an alcoholic? What's the amount? What's the number? How do you need to feel? And grey area drinking almost looks at it as being on a scale. So if you take a scale of 1 to 10, 1 is someone that very rarely drinks, doesn't think about drinking, maybe has a glass of wine at a wedding twice a year, and other than that, alcohol just doesn't even feature in their life. 10 is someone who is an end stage user of alcohol. And when I say end stage, what I mean is if they were to suddenly stop drinking, they would die. They need to have physical health intervention to be able to stop drinking. They need to go into a rehab clinic. They need to have medical assistance. So you've got a 1 and a 10 there that are very, very extreme levels of someone's relationship with alcohol. What is in the middle? And that is what I focus on, is the grey area. I would describe the grey area as being perhaps on that scale between a 5 and an 8. And I probably hovered around 5 and 8 for a really long time.
Right, thank you. It's such a clear distinction, isn't it? And you're right that we do. I guess unless would identify with being what you would term at a number 10 at that very, very high end of the alcohol spectrum, the alcohol drinking spectrum, an alcoholic. And even people who are alcoholics often don't identify with that either, do they? And I'd love to talk more about that as well. So this idea that it's somewhere in the middle. And yeah, so tell me, how did you come across this work and how has it impacted your life personally? I know you've recently celebrated 1,000 days sober, so congratulations.
Yeah.
Tell us more about your anxiety and your drinking and how it impacted on your life.
Sure. So I'd always been the party girl, always someone that loved the party. But through my, growing up in the UK in Northern England, we started drinking at 14, 15. That was what you did at the weekend. You went down the local bus stop with a bottle of cider, you got pissed and you kissed inappropriate boys. And that was kind of childhood in the UK, right? And then I went to uni where it was all a pound a pint. We can match the boys. We can drink as much as them. And definitely that drinking culture was heavy. It was an era in the 90s where it was girl power. It was the girls can do the same as the boys, Sex of the City, all of that. And then I left uni, I moved straight to London, and it was all, I'd gone from my pound a pint to my sophisticated Sauvignon Blanc, and I was doing the cocktails, I was doing the rooftop gardens, I was doing the client lunches. So alcohol featured heavily in my life, but at that point, not in a problematic way. I didn't drink really on my own. I didn't drink at home during the week if I wasn't going out. It was very much, I socialized a lot. I drank a lot when I socialized. Hangovers, in your 20s, you kind of don't really feature that much. I would happily stay out till 3 a.m. and then be on the tube to work at 7 a.m. with like a Macca's burger in one hand and a coffee in the other, and go and do a full day's work and then back to the pub that night. And that was like, burning the candle at both ends back in those days was very much how things were done. For me, everything changed when 2 big life-changing events happened. So we got married and we had our son. And shortly after having our son, my husband and I decided to move to Australia. He's a Kiwi, I'm from London. We'd actually met in Australia, and wanted to kind of bring up our kids in more of, the outdoor world. The beaches, London's a brilliant place to live, but suddenly when you're at home with a kid, it's not quite the same because you're not doing the restaurants and the theatres and the clubs and all the rest of it. And so, but you don't have any green open space and it's really busy everywhere. So we moved to Perth, and then I had another baby really quickly after we got here. So all of a sudden, I'd left all of my support network. I had no friends. I had no family. I'd had a really successful career and I wasn't working. And I was at home with 2 kids under 2. I didn't know anyone. My husband was setting up a business, so he was working really long hours and he was out all day. And I fell hook, line and sinker to the whole mummy wine culture. I deserved wine. Wine was my friend. Wine was what I looked forward to at the end of the day. And it made sense to me that wine would feature in my life because I had always been a big drinker. And so I didn't notice it at the time, but it just suddenly started creeping up. It wasn't anymore just on a Friday and Saturday. Then it was a Wednesday and Thursday as well. And then it wasn't just when the kids had gone to bed at 7 o'clock, then it was at 5 o'clock. And looking back now, it was my reward. Like but my life was so different. I was at home all day. I wasn't working. I was lonely, and I was probably suffering from a little bit of postnatal depression. And I was not myself. And I thought that alcohol was my treat and my reward. Um, but what started to happen was the more I was drinking, the worse I was feeling. But I didn't put that down to the alcohol. I put it down to I'm lonely, I'm tired, I'm a new mum, I've got young kids. By this point, I had gone back to work. I was juggling setting up my own business. I had the kids, but we still had no family support. Wine was still featuring heavily as my only coping mechanism to support me, to soothe me. It was how I made friends. It was what I associated with connection, all of those things. But what started happening, and as I got older as well, in my late 30s, and after I hit 40, the hangovers were getting worse. The anxiety the next day it was really debilitating. The thoughts that were going through my head, I was sat ruminating. What did I say last night? I can't remember. Going to bed. Oh my God, did I send that text message? And I'd never had anxiety in my life. And I was becoming this shell of a person that was seeking out the wine because I thought that was the solution. But the wine was having the impact. It was affecting my sleep. It was impacting my mental health. I went at one point to my GP. I was a mess. And at no point did she even ask me, how much are you drinking? She happily wrote me a prescription for anti-anxiety tablets. But at no point did the question come up, how much are you drinking? But there was something in me here. I knew that my drinking was getting to that level. I just knew. And I was scrolling Facebook one day and I saw someone in my running group had posted that they'd read a book about being alcohol free. So I read the book and I took 100 days off. And this was back in 2017. And I was like, oh my goodness, everything suddenly changed. I was clearer. I had mental clarity. I was positive. I had more energy. The anxiety all but disappeared. And it was just like, oh my goodness, all of the things that have been so problematic for me have disappeared with removing the alcohol. But then it got to the end of the 100 days and it was like, well, I can't never drink again. That would just be weird because I'm Sarah the party girl. I can't possibly not drink again. So then I was like, oh, it's fine. I'm fixed now. I've taken 100 days off. I can't possibly be an alcoholic because if I was, I wouldn't have been able to do that. So now everything's okay. I'll be a normal drinker. Within 2 weeks, I was back to drinking the same level as before because that's how addiction works. And for 2 years, I was trapped in that cycle of taking breaks, loving who I was when I didn't drink, loving the reward that I got from not drinking, but then going, I will be able to moderate this time. It's all about me. It's willpower. I need to be better. I will keep trying. Never succeeding because the neural pathways in my brain are so deeply embedded around alcohol. And once I have one, I want more, I want more, I want more. And then I finally realized April 2019, that's it. And that's when I had my last drink.
Really? Oh gosh. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing your journey because I think it's really interesting for all of us listening and learning from you about sort of how it evolved and the challenges that you had and it can't have been easy. I mean, moving to a different country and not knowing anyone, plus 2 under 2 is all of those challenges and not having family around. 2 under 2 is hard when there are family and friends around to support you and you get a break. So I thank you for sharing that journey. And what's really stood out for me is when you started to talk about the idea that you would take a break, you would go back and you would think, I can do it this time. But because of the neural pathways, and because there was an addiction, willpower cannot be relied on. In fact, we really should never really rely on willpower and motivation for much in our lives, but that's probably a conversation for another day. So tell us more, please, about what happens to the brain when we drink, because we know it's relaxing. And that's why a lot of people with anxiety will look to a drink at the end of the day. So it's interesting that it fueled your anxiety, whereas for a lot of people, there's that present anxiety that is settled with a drink or two. So I'd love to learn a bit more about, well, what happens when we drink in terms of alcohol in the brain, and also what is it about the addiction that means it can be really hard for some people to stop and make that change without some support.
Yeah, brilliant questions. So the first thing to be aware of when we drink alcohol, the first thing that it does is it lights up the reward center in the brain, the dopamine. We get a flood of dopamine, and the brain just wants homeostasis. It just wants everything to be at the right level, and it can't bear that we have this massive flood of dopamine, and it actually releases a hormone called dynorphin that is a depressant. So to bring us down. So that's the first thing to be aware of. None of us are told that, right? When we have that glass of wine, that the brain actually cannot cope with the huge flooding of dopamine, that it creates its own hormone to make us depressed to counter the effects of the alcohol. So if you're drinking at the level I was drinking, which, let's be clear, was not every day, and was probably at the level that most of the women I'm working with and the men are drinking at, who don't identify as being alcoholics and do identify as being social drinkers. The other thing to bear in mind is this: when we drink alcohol, no matter what, we get that high at the beginning, and it does exactly what we want it to do. It makes us feel like we have that warm honey feeling, I call it, where it kind of just feels like everything is just slipping away, and we're feeling that instant. We've had the dopamine response, we feel good, and we're starting to feel relaxed. We start off at, say, let's just say we're on a scale, because I think it's easier because the listeners can't see what I'm doing with my hands here. But we start off at, let's say we're starting off at a number 3. We've had an average day. It's been okay. We're feeling at about a number 3 right now. You have the glass of wine, and the first 20 minutes, we might jump up to being a number 7. Oh, that feels pretty good. I feel a bit relaxed now. Everything feels great. That doesn't stay, right? So we start to go through alcohol withdrawal the minute we've had that glass of wine. But what happens is, when the wine wears off, we don't go back to being a number 3, we go down to about a -1. So then we're left feeling a bit antsy, a bit anxious, a bit restless. Like, I hated going for a lunch where I could only have 1 or 2 drinks. Like, to me, that was hell, because when the alcohol wore off, I would just feel a little bit out of sorts and not myself. And so if you've gone down to a -1, if you then have another drink, and you have that other drink, and that sends you back up again. So before you went to a 7, you're never going to get that same high again, because you're starting off at a lower point. So maybe the second drink gets you up to about a number 3.
In terms of your mood, you're referencing mood, yes.
Yeah. But then that wears off. And then we start to feel pretty crappy again. If you've been doing that for 4 or 5 hours, the next day, the alcohol withdrawal that your body has still been processing means it's going to take a while before you're feeling good. It's going to take a while before everything has recalibrated in your brain and you're feeling back even at the normal level that you were before you even started. If you're drinking, so it takes up to 48 hours completely for alcohol to leave the system. You don't even need to be drinking every single day. So this is the thing that I say to people is, and it impacts your sleep. So the other thing to be aware of is that when we drink alcohol, we don't get, it really affects the number of REM cycles that we have with REM sleep. We have about 5 cycles a night that will circulate through REM, REM sleep, and deep sleep. And alcohol, it's been proven, really affects REM sleep. So we might pass out when we've had alcohol because it's that depressant, and it will send us really into a deep sleep. But quite often we'll wake up 5 hours later, and then we can't get back to sleep. And that's because there are so many physiological things that are happening in the body to process the alcohol. So that started happening to me so much. Every time I drank, even if it was just 2 hours, 2 glasses of wine, I would wake up unable to get back to sleep at that kind of 3 a.m. point.
Yes, and I think that that's something that's really important to, I'm really glad you've raised that. That was a question I was going to talk to you about, because I think there can be a real misconception that alcohol affects sleep, because if you do have a few drinks, you do fall asleep. And it was so interesting because we were away on holidays in January, and my friend and I like to make ourselves Cosmos when we're together. And the first night we were there, we celebrated, we made our Cosmos. My sleep was absolutely shocking, because up until that point, I only have a G&T now on a Friday or a Saturday night, just one on a Friday or a Saturday night, and or maybe both in a week, just one drink, and I'm very happy with that. I'm comfortable with that. And so to go to having a couple of Cosmos, or we might have even have 3 each, my sleep was shocking. I had restless legs. I was tossing and turning. And the heat didn't help, and you're in a new house, you're staying somewhere different and all of that. But I very quickly was able to put it down to the alcohol, which was good for me, because then I was able to adjust what I was doing and finally get the rest that I needed, that helped me and helps everyone around me.
Yeah, yeah,
So I think it's really important, because we know sleep, we know anxiety affects sleep, and we know lack of sleep only amplifies anxiety. And
yeah,
so throw that in the mix. And
yeah.
yeah, it's really can be quite devastating on people's mood, mental health, and functioning.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the other thing that I've discovered, so you've impacted your sleep. You've released a hormone in your brain that is a depressant to counter the impact of the alcohol. Your body is going through alcohol withdrawal that leaves you feeling anxious and on edge anyway. And then the fourth thing to take into account is, I would say, of the people that I work with, about 80% of them are deficient in GABA. Now, GABA is the neurotransmitter that is responsible for making us feel calm and relaxed. And when I do one-on-one sessions with my clients, I do a questionnaire to ascertain if they've got deficiencies in dopamine, serotonin, or GABA. And 80% of the women I've worked with so far have been deficient in GABA. So it's no wonder that they're reaching for alcohol, because in the first instance, that's what wine does. It does relax us. But the problem is that then it leaves us feeling more anxious. And so then it's a vicious cycle, because then we're craving the wine. The neural pathways have started to be created that are going, oh, when I feel anxious, I have wine and then I feel better. So we've created that message in the brain. The brain's not going, oh, yeah, but then you wake up at 3 a.m. The brain is just going, this is what I've done before, and this is what worked in that moment, so this is what I must do again. So the way that I work with my clients when I do one-on-one work is, how can we start restoring your GABA naturally? And that's through lifestyle, through nutrition, through supplements, because that's a really critical part. Because if you're taking the alcohol out, we need to look at what we're adding in.
Yes, and GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid is, so GABA is the acronym, is something that I talked about in a recent episode where I talked about exercise. And I talk about the idea that it's a neurotransmitter that helps put the brakes on the stress response. And we want GABA, and that's one of the reasons exercise is another really powerful prescription when it comes to anxiety. So interesting that you're able to make those assessments. And what sort of questions, so if how would a person listening, just as a bit of, I know that you probably have a lengthy assessment that you do, but just to give people a little bit of an idea, if they might be low in GABA, what sort of questions might you ask that would point to GABA being at a low level for someone?
So if you're regularly feeling quite anxious, you're having those ruminating thoughts, you start going down those rabbit holes, you can't let things go, little things are becoming mountains in your, really big mountains that are becoming almost obsessive. So when you notice that that's where your brain is going a lot of the time, those are the first signs. And it's really interesting, because I listened to a podcast interview the other day with the guy in America who runs the most successful addiction rehab facility in America. And the reason he is so successful and gets higher success rates than any other addiction center in the USA is because he provides his patients with intravenous GABA.
Is that right? Goodness me, I've never heard of that. So he supplements them with GABA intravenously while they're with him. How long would they be with him for? Do you know?
It can vary, but he says that he sees some of the gains that he would expect a patient not getting that supplementation to get after, say, 6 months, his patients are getting after 3 weeks.
Is that right? And then he obviously weans them off the
Yeah.
IV GABA and helps them to bring more GABA into their life more naturally.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me more and tell us more about dopamine and what happens with addiction and what we can do about it?
Yeah. Have you come across the work of Gabor Mate?
No, I haven't.
Okay. So Gabor Mate is probably one of the world's leading addiction experts. And There's a podcast, Jodie, that I'll send you. You will absolutely love it.
Thank you.
He describes addiction as any behavior that a person finds temporary pleasure or relief in. Therefore, they crave it, they suffer negative consequences from it, and they have trouble giving it up.
Mm.
So if you think about it, we get that from sugar, we get it from caffeine, we get it from sex, from pornography, from gambling, from online shopping, from alcohol, from cocaine. Like, if it's something that alters our behavior, we get a temporary pleasure from doing it, we find relief in it, we're having trouble giving it up, and we're craving it.
Mm.
And the thing with alcohol that I found for me and for most of the people that are in my programs that I'm working with, and just to be clear, I'm not an addiction specialist. I'm not a therapist. I'm a coach. I'm a grey area drinking coach. But of course, through the work I've been doing, I've done so much reading and taken on so much information around this area. And I'm just also about to start my training in sugar addiction, because what I find is so many of my ladies, when they stop drinking alcohol, they swap the alcohol for sugar, because we're looking for that dopamine reward center in the brain that has suddenly gone quiet because we're not getting the alcohol, and the brain is still craving. Because there's a brilliant book called Dopamine Nation. I don't know if you've read it. It's so good for explaining what is happening in those neural pathways. And the dopamine reward center of the brain, the way that this lady describes it, is it's meant to be tickled and not punched. So if you think about, we're meant to do the natural things to highlight the dopamine reward center, whether it's exercise, whether it's sex, whether it's connection with a friend, whether it's just the natural things that humans are designed to do to light us up and to make us feel good. And that's what you call a tickle, right? Cocaine,
Yes.
alcohol, sugar, they kill some of those neurons in the dopamine center because they are so powerful and so hard. But almost what can happen is the brain almost goes on strike, going, well, I'm not going to start responding to those other things that light up my dopamine reward center, because these things are doing it all for me itself, and they're so strong and so powerful. So then we stop finding pleasure from the things that give us the tickle, and we're only looking for the things that give us the punch. And then
Yes.
we become addicted to the things that are giving the punch because our brain has stopped responding to the other things. And then
Mm.
and this is what happened for me with alcohol, is then you stop finding pleasure in the simple things in life because you're so becoming reliant on alcohol and associating the alcohol with what's bringing you fun, joy, connection, laughter, interest, all of those things, that you're craving the alcohol to give you all of those things because you're not finding it anywhere else. And so when I help people to remove alcohol, it's so much more than removing alcohol, because it's about starting to retrain the dopamine reward center in the brain and start building other coping mechanisms for dealing with stress and anxiety and all of those other things.
Yes, and that's a big job. That's a big job. And so when you so I know you have a 30-day challenge on your website. Am I right in you have a 30-day challenge? So when somebody is, because a lot of people do Feb fast, there will be some people doing Feb fast. And I was doing some reading the other day, and I can't recall where I was reading. Doesn't matter where it was, but I remember this particular author might have been in light of Feb fast coming up, supporting people to think about taking a break from alcohol as not being a deprivation. If you think about it as being a deprivation and a huge sacrifice, that you're not going to get very far with your Feb fast, and it's going to be really painful if you do. It's going to be really difficult, and it is difficult for anybody. And one of the things you've mentioned, so many ways that this dopamine reward center of our brain is impacted, and one of the other ways is through our social media, through that scrolling. We're looking for those hits, and with TikTok, which are 15-second hits, with YouTube Shorts. YouTube have got on board with their YouTube Shorts. And that, no doubt, that affects attention and the like. So there are so many things that are just in the palms of our hands that are affecting this. And so whether it be, and we're talking about alcohol today, but when we're trying to change behaviour and we're trying to limit what we know rationally is not good for us, doesn't make us feel good, but we're having trouble kind of letting go, whether it's the drink or scrolling our feeds too much or having that sweet treat all the time. How do you start with that, and how do you compensate? Like you were saying, some women go from alcohol to sugar because their brain is still saying, I'm craving this. So how do you get started and keep going when those cravings become really difficult
Yeah.
to
And a big part of it
experience?
is we have to start to understand how to manage cravings. But the whole of my programs, my 30-day programs, and I run them 4 times a year, is the focus is not on what am I missing out on, it's what am I gaining. Because like you just said, if we're spending the whole month going, well, my life's crap, I might as well just stay home and do nothing for the whole month, I'm not going to have any fun this month. If you're looking with that attitude, it's going to feel like deprivation. Whereas if you start going, well, look at all that I'm gaining by taking a month off booze. I'm going to have loads more energy. My sleep's going to be better. I can wake up on a Saturday morning at 6 a.m. and go to that gym class and have the whole day stretching ahead of me without even having to think about alcohol or factor in a hangover or any of those things. And so everything I do with my ladies in my program is around what are we gaining? But also I help them to change their mindset around alcohol, because for some people, like for yourself, Jodie, it sounds like you've talked about, you're a take it or leave it drinker, it sounds to me. You're someone that can have that drink now and then. You noticed that you were drinking more in lockdown. You went, okay, I'm not happy with that. I'm going to drink less. And that was it for you. You probably haven't crossed that line. And there is an arbitrary line that some people have crossed. And that's where I think we've gone into that level of addiction. Like I would say, I was not an alcoholic. I wasn't physically dependent on alcohol, but I was addicted to it because I craved it to change my state of mind. I got temporary relief from it and I had trouble stopping. So those were the signs to me that there was an addiction. And what we now know is the brain cannot unknow that neural pathway. So if I could take a month off, a year off, or 3 years off, the minute I pick up another drink, I'm going to be right back to where I was. There's no such thing as a reset for me. And now that I understand that, I actually feel lucky because I understand that. And I have found absolute freedom in creating a life without alcohol and focus on everything that I'm gaining. And that's why I retrained to be a grey area drinking coach, because I'm so passionate about other people not being stuck where I was, which was with the thought that a life without alcohol is going to be terrible. A life without alcohol will be no fun. I'll never have any friends. I'll be lonely and I won't do anything interesting for the rest of my life. It's not about that. And we are so conditioned to believe that we have to have alcohol at every celebration, every big event in our life. It's only going to be fun if we have alcohol. And that is so not true.
Yes, you're right. It's so cultural, isn't it? And I remember when we first moved in here, this has been our home as long as we've been together. And I remember when we moved in, I sort of felt like more grown up. I had my own kitchen. And what do I do when I cook a meal? I pour a glass of wine. And so each afternoon or evening, when I would be cooking the evening meal, I felt it made me feel like I'm doing what I've seen done before. Not that I recalled my mum doing that, but it was just ingrained in the culture of society that you could have this glass of wine and feel very grown up, and I adopted that as a part of my lifestyle for a while, until I realized that I don't actually love wine that much and I'm not really feeling that great. And the novelty, I think, kind of wore off.
Yeah. And the questions that I always get people to ask themselves is, am I comfortable with how much I'm drinking? Do I make rules around my drinking? Because I think if we've even got to the point where we're making rules, and even I can tell by looking at some people are like, I've never made a rule about my drinking. What are you talking about? Jodie, I lived in rules around my drinking. All I ever did was make rules around my drinking. Right, you're not allowed to drink on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. You can only drink on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, only if you're out of the house, not before 5 o'clock. You can't drink white wine on a Friday because that gives you the worst hangover. If you want to drink on a Wednesday, it's only if you don't drink on a Thursday. Like, that's what it's like to live in the head of someone with some addiction with alcohol. Like, there was constant chatter in my head. And constant thought, when was I allowed to drink? When could I drink? When would it be acceptable? Would I have 2 tonight? And if you're even at that point, then there's probably some kind of dysfunctional relationship with alcohol. And I think I've mentioned to you before that I did an interview with Mamma Mia last year and they published it in their magazine. And I shared my story in the way that I've just shared it with your listeners. And in 3 days, 7,500 women reached out to me, and every single one of them said you've just told my story.
Wow.
Because this is the thing, no one else is talking about it. In our culture, you're an
Mm.
alcoholic or you're a drinker.
Yes. You've got a problem or you haven't, but we're not educated around it. And I can tell that you're so passionate about this. And I feel the same way about my work, in that you just when you gain insight, and it's from personal experience, isn't it? We're both coming to the work that we love
Yeah,
from our own experiences and knowing what we've done that's made such a difference in our lives, and then wanting other people to have access to those
yeah,
skills and that knowledge and those insights. And you're right, there isn't that education, and it's lacking, and it's sad, really, because people's lives can be really devastated by their relationship with alcohol. And it's not only the person who's doing the
no.
drinking that we know, is it? It affects everybody around them.
It really does. It affects their, like, my relationship with my kids is so different since I stopped drinking. And that was
Mm.
my biggest why. I'll tell you a story. The day before I did my first ever break, I had gone to a girlfriend's birthday. It'd be one of those all you can drink champagne buffets. And we started at 12. And I got home at 2 in the morning. So it was 14 hours of drinking champagne. And at 7 in the morning, I had to take my son to cricket. And I was still over the limit. So I couldn't drive my son
Mm.
to the thing that he loves most in the world because his mum was still over the limit on a Sunday morning. That
Oh.
was the moment for me when
Mm.
I knew that it had to change, because it wasn't fair on him to be suffering because of
No.
my drinking, and that's, but would I have called myself an alcoholic? No, because that was a one-off situation, but I never knew when it was going to be that kind of situation. I had no
Yeah.
control over knowing what was going to be the night that I might stop at 3 and what was going to be the night that was going to turn into an 8-hour bender. I had no control over knowing that. It was just like there was a switch in my brain and I didn't know when that switch would be on or off. I had no control, and that scared
Oh,
me.
I can only imagine what that experience must have been like for you. That was quite a turning point by the sounds of things.
Yeah, yeah. But I'm
Yes.
grateful for it because something had
Mm.
to change, and I'm grateful that it was nothing too serious. Like, that was serious, but that was fixable. And I changed me to be
Yes.
a better mum for him, right? And that was what was so
Yes.
important to me. And that's my why every single day. And now my why is to show all of these people that I work with and in my community that you don't have to be an alcoholic to decide to stop drinking. But we are made to feel so ashamed in our culture that if you don't drink, or you've had a problem with drinking, like that's some dirty, shameful secret. And alcohol's the only drug we have to justify not taking. You say to someone, I've stopped
Yes.
smoking, and they're like, good on you. You say to someone, I'm not drinking, and they're like, oh, don't be so boring, just have one.
Yes. You are right about that. You are right. You find that, don't you? That it's like, well, you're a wowser.
Yeah,
That's it's frowned upon almost.
yeah,
But it's interesting, because I wonder whether or not that's triggering something in the person who's got something to
for
say
sure,
about it.
for sure.
Yes. Yes. Oh, Sarah, now I say this with I'm just such a chatterbox. I just love learning, and I love this forum to be able to bring this really important knowledge to our listeners, because a lot of our listeners today, or listening to this episode, no matter when you're listening to it, are parents, and there are a lot who aren't. And a lot of people who are listening will be in a position to be able to share what they're learning with the people around them as well, with who they
Yeah.
love and with their own children. And so, what would be your advice to somebody who is listening today and is starting to sort of think, well, gosh, this is resonating. I think this is something that perhaps I might like to start to really seriously consider doing, which is reducing alcohol intake, or giving up alcohol altogether. What would you say would be one of the first steps to take on this journey?
Yeah. Look, I think the first thing is to see it as an experiment, because most people have never, ever got to know the version of them that doesn't drink. Because most of
Mm.
us, even if we don't drink every day, if we've drunk 3 nights a week or 4 nights a week for the last 20, 30 years, that will have impacted our sleep, our mental health, and our general motivation, our energy, and our well being. So we have
Mm.
never lived at our full potential. So I say to everybody, see it as an experiment, be curious, like commit to taking. I always say 90 days because I think you don't get the full benefit in 1 month. And while my programs are 30 days, I do offer ongoing support for those that want to carry on, because I think 90 days is when you really, really get that observation of what life without alcohol is really like. Because for some people, they might feel like absolute crap for the first 4 weeks, because if they've been drinking quite heavily and consistently, they're going through withdrawal and detox for quite a while before they start to get any of the benefits. And that's what really frustrates me about some of those programs that are, or the challenges, which are 30-day challenges, and then let's celebrate with getting absolutely smashed on day 31. And then it's like, well, what have I learned and what have I gained from doing that alcohol-free challenge? So I always say to everyone, be curious. There are some brilliant books out there that are memoirs that share, and it was the books, and there's a free guide on my website that everyone can go and download, which has got all of my resources completely free that really helped me in the early days. Doing a program, whether it's mine or someone else's, where you get the support and the coaching and the guidance for managing cravings, for dealing with emotions, because so many of us drink because we've got nothing else in our toolkit for handling whatever life has thrown at us that day, and all we've ever done is drink. So be curious, be open to expect. What's 3 months out of 30 years of drinking? What is 3 months of just giving yourself the chance to get to know you without booze? Because that first time that I did it, that first 100 days back in 2017, I never ever forgot what it was like to feel so positive and so energized, and to have the mental clarity that I had. And it was like going from living in black and white to living in color. It's the only way I can describe it.
Mm. Oh, I love that reference. I've used that reference myself, having struggled a lot with my mental health over my life, especially having experienced depression. And it's that, and it's just an absolute 180, isn't it? When you're making that reference to black and white to color, you know it's just been absolutely life changing.
Totally.
And I know that I love that you reference the idea of people not having the productive strategies in their toolkit. And I like to use the word productive or helpful rather than good or bad coping strategies, because we know alcohol is an unhelpful coping strategy. And one of the things I've been doing on the podcast has been sharing tips and strategies and tools along the way to help people sort of build out that coping toolkit. And one of the things that I'd love to add to your brilliant advice is the idea that you are going to have a craving, you are going to have an urge, you are going to feel uncomfortable. And we know that an urge is not an instruction. And we know that a craving is a set of sensations, and they do pass. And if we can develop this willingness to certainly to know that they're going to be coming is helpful, and develop this willingness, which Dr. John Forsyth talked about, the W word, and Carly Taylor talked about acceptance in episode 1, that using these skills and tools that you've already learned here on the podcast will support you with your journey. And Sarah's advice is just extraordinary. And I love the idea of an experiment. I think it's really nice because it just takes the pressure off, doesn't it? It's just like, give it a go, see what happens, use the tools that are available through your website. And I'll ask you to share all of those details in a moment. Use what you've got in your toolkit as you continue to grow it. And I wonder if one additional thing, because what I'm picturing is that, like, when I first was a homeowner and I would make the dinner and drink the wine, that was very much a trigger for me, was starting to cook, pour the wine. And is one of the pieces of advice that you share with the people that you work with around habits, and maybe, if, like with smoking, for example, if you always do have a cigarette when you walk outside on your work break, well, then maybe instead of walking outside on your work break, go and chat with a colleague or go to the lunchroom or do something different, change that routine. Is that one of the things that you advise?
So it depends on the person. Quite often the saying in the alcohol-free world can be keep the ritual, change the ingredient. So Like I
Right.
love an alcohol-free champagne, for example, and I will have a kombucha, or I'll have in a lovely wine glass. Like that for me in the early days on a Friday night, because Friday night was always my worst trigger night. Would be, but that's my little treat, and that's what I'm going to do. And so it's just about working out what it is for you. But for so many of us, if it is the glass of wine when cooking dinner, then sometimes just a wine glass with some sparkling water and some elderflower juice, or whatever it is for you. But yeah, keep that ritual but change the ingredient is has been really helpful for me and for so many others.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Now, tell me, before I ask you to share with our listeners how they can get in contact with you and work with you and learn more about what you do, could you please tell us some of your favourite alcohol-free alternatives?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's so many options available now, which is great. I mean, I'm plugging to get more and more available in the bars and restaurants, because when I go out to a bar and restaurant, I don't want to drink water or a high sugary soft drink. I want to have an alcohol-free champagne or an alcohol-free wine, but it's getting better. So Thompson and Scott Naughty is a French alcohol-free champagne. It's like really low sugar, 2 grams of sugar per glass. It's really lovely. There's another called Venada, the alcohol-free gin and tonics, Naked Life. You can get in Coles and Woolies now. They're no sugar, tastes like a gin and tonic. Put some fresh rosemary and a slice of lemon in. Like there are so many now. I love the beers, the ciders, the Bilpin apple and ginger cider, all alcohol-free, but so good.
Oh, awesome. What I'd love you to send me those, please, some of those names, and I'll put all links to those products in the show notes as well, and anything else that Sarah thinks would be a really great reference for you, I'll put in the show notes. So, Sarah, how can people find you?
Yeah. So my website is just sarahrusbatch.com. So my surname is spelt Rusbatch. So just Google Sarah Rusbatch and you'll find me. Instagram and Facebook is at Sarah Rusbatch. And for the ladies that would be interested in joining a free community, we've got 10,000 women now all over the world who are all supporting and connecting and sharing. And not everyone's alcohol free. There's a whole term out there which has just been added to the dictionary, actually, called sober curious. So it's people who are curious about sobriety. So they're interested. They're starting to learn more about it. So loads of the ladies in my group are what you would call sober curious. We talk about how alcohol impacts hormones, the link with breast cancer, perimenopause. We talk about alcohol and cravings and sugar cravings, but we don't just talk about alcohol either. We just talk about life in general for women in our 40s and 50s and how we can manage stress in other ways. It's a really supportive group, and that's called the Women's Wellbeing Collective, and there's a link to that on my website as well.
Oh, amazing, amazing. Oh, look, honestly, I really encourage, and as I said at the start, you do work one-on-one with gentlemen as well. So anyone who's listening, if you're interested in working with Sarah, Sarah and I hadn't met before today, but I'm so thrilled to have had the chance to chat with you. I've learned so much, and I really appreciate you taking the time and just sharing so generously your own experience and so much of what you've learned. I know we've only just scraped the surface, but so much of what you've learned, so that we can start to sort of reflect on our own behaviours and choices and know that there is a lot of help out there if we want to make change, and we can also start to make change on our own with some of your great resources. So thank you, Sarah, so much, and I hope that you have a lovely rest of the day in beautiful Perth, and I hope that we can get over to Perth soon.
Oh, I know. I'm desperate to travel. So yeah, absolutely. But thank you so much for having me on. It's, you can see how passionate I am about what I do. And so for me to be able to spread the message that you don't have to be an alcoholic to change your relationship with alcohol is so important. And I can't, I sing it from the rooftops. So thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Oh, absolute pleasure. No, thanks again, Sarah, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr. Jodie Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.